great powers have forgotten that fact and are making the same mistakes over and over again. This fact has great implication for Korea, which is surrounded by four major powers: the United States, China, Russia, and Japan. The people of Afghanistan were the first in modern history to prove that it is worth competing with any country. As long as there is a spirit of not falling into despair in any difficult situation. Over the course of 150 years, the people of Afghanistan have resisted the three most powerful countries on the planet at that time, with the determination to die fighting if necessary. In the 19th century, the opponent was England. Britain was the most powerful country at that time, and was even nicknamed the country where the sun never sets. But Britain has a strange phobia of Russia. There was a fear that Russia could invade their colony India via Central Asia. The British preemptively invaded Afghanistan, a route through which Russia could advance south, and occupied it in 1839. At that time, the British occupation of Afghanistan without even the most modest weapons was as easy as fighting a child. But the people of Afghanistan did not just endure it. 3 years into the first occupation, local tribal forces united an uprising. Britain, which underestimated Afghanistan, suffered a catastrophe in which over 70,000 soldiers were slaughtered or promptly ran away. After that, the British invaded Afghanistan twice but failed to fully colonize it. Eventually, in 1919, they created a strange border in the shape of an elongated tail at the eastern end of Afghanistan and withdrew completely. The border was like a kind of unarmed military demarcation line created by thinking of Russia as a virtual enemy. It was called the Wakhan Corridor. On the Russian side, there was the intimidation that it would be considered war if Britain crossed over here. Today, the end of the Wakhan Corridor is connected to China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Both regions are heavily Islamic. It is very likely that the people of Afghanistan and Xinjiang will one day help each other in some form or another. These historical geopolitics are the reason that the next victim in Afghanistan's tomb of empires is likely to be China. In the late 20th century, Afghanistan was invaded by the Soviet Union. Afghanistan's political system was very unstable throughout the 20th century. In the early days, it maintained a monarchy, but in the mid-20th century, as coups erupted consistently, it continued to become a republic, then became a coalition of Islamic tribes, and the political system changed in this way. In 1978, communists came to power. Then anti-communist Muslim guerrillas called the Mujahideen started another civil war. The Mujahideens called their wars holy war or jihad. The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan under the pretext of protecting the communist regime, crossing the border on a large scale on Christmas Day 1979. The West, including the US, argued that the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was illegal. In the Moscow Olympics held the following year, not all Western countries were able to participate, so it became a half Olympics. Since then, war continued in Afghanistan for 10 years. In the end, the Soviet Union withdrew with serious wounds. The Soviet Union suffered too many internal wounds at that time. During those 10 years, the Soviet Union spent a lot of money on the war, which eventually led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the collapse of the Cold War system in 1991. A huge part of the Soviet Union was caught in the trap of Afghanistan and fell into a quagmire from which it couldn't get out. Today, the latest victim of Afghanistan is the United States. The United States invaded Afghanistan on October 7, 2001. Al-Qaeda's Osama bin Laden, the main culprit of 9/11, hid in Afghanistan, and the US attacked Afghanistan on the pretext of arresting him. The United States, knowing what Britain and the Soviet Union had experienced in Afghanistan in the past, thought that a long-term war was not feasible. The plan was to eliminate only Bin Laden and withdraw as soon as possible. Before sending in the ground forces, the United States dropped massive amounts of bombs from the sky. Wherever the Taliban or Al-Qaeda were believed to be, bombs were detonated like a storm. After attacking like that for a month, US forces entered the capital Kabul on November 12th. They occupied Kabul without a major battle, as they did not even give their opponents time to prepare for street fighting. A month after that, Kandahar, the stronghold of the Taliban, was also occupied and the Taliban surrendered, but the problem was that Bin Laden wasn't there. Bin Laden had fled to a deep cave in the Hindu Kush mountains when the US began to attack Afghanistan. And after a while, when the US forces pursued him to the vicinity of the cave, he ran away again and disappeared forever. After that, the United States could not find Bin Laden, and the Taliban forces were resurgent. So, the United States had to wage an absurd war with the Islamic fundamentalists that dragged on for 20 years. In 2011, 10 years after the start of the war in Afghanistan, Bin Laden, who had been the cause of the war, was shot and killed by US Special Forces units in a private house in Pakistan. The United States withdrew without any other achievement in 2021. 20 years after the start of the war. As soon as the US troops withdrew, the Taliban took over the regime as if they had been waiting. When the United States first entered Afghanistan, it promised to give the country the roots of democracy, but that promise turned into nothing. In any case, the war between Afghanistan and the United States became the longest of all wars that the United States has ever fought, including World Wars I and II and the wars in Korea, Vietnam, and Iraq. During the war, more than 60,000 local supporters of the US died, and more than 3,000 American and coalition soldiers died. The financial damage to the United States is so great that it cannot be quantified. More than $2 trillion is a common estimate. Vietnam is similar to Afghanistan in many ways. Vietnam started the First Indochina War against France in the 1950s. To Vietnam, France was a country that had ruled over them for nearly 100 years. However, even after the end of the Second World War, France did not back down and was clamoring to maintain the colony. Finally, the Vietnamese became desperate to independence, even at risk of death. In several places, battles were fought with the French army. Among them, the highlight was the Battle of Ian Bienv. The French military has established a fortress in Ian Bienv, a strategic point on the Vietnam-Laos border. Thousands of elite soldiers were stationed there. Because this place is so deep in the mountains, it was difficult to obtain large firearms and even trivial supplies without the help of air power. The French army made a base and was at peace and without any worries. But one day, the Vietnamese army launched a massive surprise attack. The Vietnamese army, led by General Von Nguyen Giap, poured formidable firepower onto the French forces for days and days in a row. The result was a complete victory for the Vietnamese army. The battle was an inflection point, and the French eventually withdrew completely from Vietnam. How did the Vietnamese carry such massive heavy weapons deep into those mountains at that time? The Vietnamese army disassembled all weapons and loaded them on bicycles or ox carts or carried them on their shoulders. More than 20,000 bicycles were mobilized, and more than 260,000 Vietnamese volunteers became members of the transport unit. Not a few weapons came from 700 kilometers away. Then troops reassembled the disassembled weapons at the top of a mountain, from which the French camp was visible, and bombarded them, and in the end, they were able to defeat the French. Not just previous battles, but most of the battles fought against France were like that. And during the Second Vietnam War and the Second Indochina War in the 1960s and 1970s, the United States was outmatched.